All those who are holding tickets outside will get in as fast as they can. I'm speaking not to you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm speaking to the crowd on the outside, who seem to be standing rather reluctant to come in, and we're going to start this very soon.
Welcome back to Worthy. My name is John.
And I'm Ben.
And welcome to the 25th episode of Worthy, where we're going to be talking about the greatest show on earth. Now it's our quarter-century episode. We've come a long way. We're in the 50s. And we're talking about the greatest show on earth, which is a circus film, to put it lightly. And obviously what comes with a circus is plenty of animals. For good and bad, we're going to talk about animals in film and film in general in this opening. So just a trigger warning, if you're triggered by animal abuse or talking about horrors of any animals, or you love animals, you don't want to hear anything bad about animals, I would skip ahead maybe 10 minutes and let us talk about, the film we have, the greatest show on earth. So to talk about the good and bad of films, animals in films, we wanted to at least talk about some of our favorite animals in film, or maybe just some of our films that are kind of inspired by animals or go follow an animal journey or just have animals in them. So Ben, is there like a film that jumps out to you where you kind of grew up or you saw recently that like is all about animals or has animals to you in it?
The one that immediately comes to mind is The Wizard of Oz and Toto.
Of course.
That's like the most, I think that's the most iconic one. I think we did an Instagram post about the dog played Toto. Mm-hmm. So scroll back on that one on our Instagram page. And so that one immediately comes to mind. But then I go to like animated movies. I think of like Balto. I think of like Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs. That comes to mind. Babe comes to mind as well. So there's like a ton of, I think there's more like animated and animatronic animals that come to mind rather than just the like actual living, breathing animals, because they're mostly used for background. There are some, dogs in movies here and there, but there's not like a one I think that stands out as like truly iconic of like that of a movie animal, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in the 90s where we were kind of, I don't know if this was the first time that we were seeing talking animals. I doubt it. I'm sure that goes even back to the 50s or maybe even 60s with like a shaggy dog. I think that's the 60s, right? But we have like Air Bud in the 90s. Homeward Bound was such a big film for me when I was younger. It follows like three animals. What else we have? Dunstan Checks In, which was an amazing movie that I loved as a kid, where like a monkey like lives in a hotel, or a chimpanzee, I forget which. But it is insane. I mean, I felt like it was so common when we were younger to see animals in film and to use live action animals.
Air Bud.
Yeah, Air Bud is like specifically because we saw so many iterations of that, and I remember watching that original movie over and over. And I mean, as a kid, how can you not love watching animals? And you always kind of like fantasize as a kid if like your animal could talk to you and like how to interact with it.
Your animals don't talk to you?
Oh God, Ben. So it's the good and the bad. Like we have such good memories of these certain animals or these performances that like we can kind of remember, and especially Toto. That's a great example where it's such an iconic dog that we even see today, and that's carried throughout its legacy from that film. But it's hard not to think about like the other side, like the dark side of having animals in film and where that can go. And we wanted to just talk a little bit about just the overall kind of story and history of like animal abuse throughout Hollywood and American film in particular, because it's good to kind of highlight this. I mean, we try to have cold opens for the show that dig deep in a topic, an actor, or a certain aspect of the film, but I think this was a perfect opportunity for us to talk about just the abuse that animals have had in the film industry over years and years. So I wanted to just give a little bit of a quick kind of small little guide throughout the history of some of the most like tragic things that have happened to animals, and we won't go too deep into any of these things, but I think it'll give us a kind of a good understanding of how much has changed, how much we probably still need to improve on, and where we're kind of going from here in film. So I think we can go all the way back to some of the earliest films, which is 1903, when Edison was making these kind of at-home factory films really early on for the country to even see films. He would basically do these recordings outside his factory, or even in this case, Coney Island, where he took an elephant named Topsy the elephant and electrocuted it to death in front of 1,500 people. So this was all recorded for entertainment. Obviously, the witnesses there were there to simply observe the death of this animal. And originally, he was planning to like actually hang the animal, but the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals intervened. So we're already having intervening of filming from as early as 1903, over almost 20 years ago. It's crazy to think about. And he would then later on put those in kinetoscopes, which you could kind of pay and watch in certain places like a supermarket or a circus, in fact. So from the very start of film, we have this kind of weird fantasy of kind of watching the horrors of animals and watching just like the cruelty of man in general. And then we carry it a little bit further in about 20 years, where we have one of the early iterations of Ben-Hur in 1926, where reportedly over 100 horses died on that set of that film. So as films are growing, we're telling bigger stories. We're telling stories about war. That obviously is kind of almost impossible to use real animals without telling those stories, especially, as you may know, obviously in 1926, there was no CGI for horses. So if we continue forward to 1939, there's cases of 2 horses dying as well in a film called Northwest Mounted Police. And in particular, a pretty tragic story from a film called Jesse James, which horses were wearing blinkers or kind of sidelines to block out their vision, and in order for them to run straight and not get distracted by anything on their side. And what the film was doing was shooting the scene where they were supposed to be running off a cliff. And obviously there were people and stuntmen on those horses, but they actually forced these horses to jump off a cliff 75 feet off of the air, and they just filmed it, and it became one of the biggest like spectacles in that film, was actually watching those horses like fall to their death. So it is extremely tragic and disturbing to think about how just normal and how used to kind of abusing animals we are at this point in our film history. And we haven't seen too many throughout our Oscar history, but it's definitely important to just note and see how much of a trend this was and how difficult it was. And obviously, if you're listening, you're probably so frustrated just hearing some of this, as I was trying to kind of document some of this. And you're wondering when there's kind of someone stepping in, or hopefully someone there to watch out for these animals. Well, we kind of start to see that in the future as we're growing and we're moving into the 40s. So I'm going to read a little bit of quote from Salon Magazine, which is written by Susan McCarthy, where she wrote, "This was the single biggest turning point in the history of Hollywood's treatment of animals. Word about the deaths got out, and there was tremendous fervor. In reaction to the outcry, the Hayes office worked with the AHA, which stands for the American Humane Association, to write guidelines for animal performances. Starting in 1940, the AHA was granted access to sets. The Hayes office, well known for its prissy extremes, such as insisting that marital bedrooms feature twin beds and Betty Boop dress more modestly, also banned apparent animal cruelty. Films were submitted to the office before release to get a certificate of approval, and often changes were demanded before a certificate was issued." The AHA was used almost as a reference for the Hayes office to kind of call in if they thought there was animal abuse. Maybe there was a film that had a lot of animals. They would call in the AHA to kind of come in and inspect the set, just kind of approve and give their stamp of approval. And it's interesting because the AHA is still used today. They still call them in to kind of inspect. And sometimes there are instances where they will decline or not give them the certificate, but the film will come out. I read about Speed Racer and how that actually was declined because of abuse of a monkey that was on set. I think someone saw a trainer actually hit the monkey, and they deemed them unworthy of being certificated for the AHA. So we're still seeing that throughout time, but what I find really interesting is that when we get to the late 90s, the early 2000s, where CGI is becoming a thing, we're seeing movies like The Lion King, The Jungle Book, and most recently Call of the Wild in 2020, starring Harrison Ford and a man in a green suit, aka Buck the dog, really show the evolution of the industry, and animals can now be recreated in almost a photorealistic manner that I think for me it's starting to begin the lines of reality, right? So we even have shows like The Walking Dead and The Umbrella Academy that have incorporated really realistic CGI wild animals or creatures, or even in the story arcs. And we also have animatronics and other types of technology that are kind of beginning to help us adapt and evolve in depicting animals in film. And one thing before we kind of jump on, I'm going to pose a lot of questions to Ben because I know we're giving so much information here, but I wanted to read from PETA because obviously they're a huge organization, whether you agree with them or not. I think it's hard to agree with everything PETA says, you know, just as a blanket statement, because they say a lot and sometimes they maybe cross the line. But obviously they're important to protecting animals and looking out for their rights and looking out to take care of them, especially in film. So this is directly from PETA's site, especially talking about film and animals in film. So, in the movie business, cash is king, and animals' well-beings will always be compromised as long as profit margins and production deadlines rule the day. The living conditions and pre-production training methods that animals endure are often unregulated and unsupervised by the industry, which is why PETA urges filmmakers to use computer-generated imagery, or animatronics, or, if the circumstances are right, cast their own companions, as Bradley Cooper did when he recruited his dog for the new version of A Star is Born. Filmmakers should always avoid commercial animal suppliers. So PETA doesn't outright directly say we don't think films should be, or we don't think animals should be in film. They're obviously giving other options that are available to people, and other options to kind of navigate and show animals in film. And they give Bradley Cooper kind of using his own dog in the film because it cuts out the middleman where you don't really know what's happening, right? The animal suppliers, the farms where tragic events might have happened. So Ben, I know I just threw a lot out there. There's so much information. We kind of went through this entire history, but is there a certain moment in your life where you kind of first realized that this is beyond a movie, or you saw something, and maybe not even something that's fiction or particular nonfiction in our case, where you really thought about the animal and really questioned yourself, like, did the animal actually do that? Is the animal actually safe?
So I think it's one, first off, really well said. So all the information you gave is absolutely pertinent, and it's really it's shitty information to hear that's what happened, but it's also important to hear. There's not a particular movie that comes to mind, but there are definitely moments as I got older, I would watch movies and understanding and learning about animal abuse in other places, and just realizing like, hey, like every animal in this movie that I'm enjoying, maybe they are going through something. Maybe there is some kind of issue going on behind set. Maybe there was animal abuse, and which is really hard because then you start to judge your own. I think when we've talked about many times about movies about horror and war, and like how that's kind of sick in a little bit, that we enjoy that and use as entertainment. And I think the same can be said about movies of animals, because you don't necessarily know. But you also, I mean, it's hard to judge because you don't know like what's going on behind scenes to really understand what was going on. But you hope that it wasn't. You try to have that hopeful thinking, especially knowing that they did try to tackle this early on. They did try to say you can't do this to animals. Animal abuse is just nowhere to be near film, and you hope that has mostly, stayed true. But also the cynic in me knows that probably isn't true. And there probably is still animal abuse going on in movies today that does feature them. So it's really hard, I think, to pinpoint like the exact moment. But after hearing like all of this, the funniest thing came to mind, and you're gonna laugh, is Jackass came to mind.
Yeah, the most recent one especially.
And in the most recent Jackass, I don't think it's really spoilers to say this, but there's a moment where one of the members of Jackass has to encounter a bear, but you see there's an bear handler on set, and the bear handler understands like when to come in to like stop anything from happening, and whether that bear is trained because it was maybe domesticated as a cub. Hopefully, that person understands that bear, specifically, and knows like when to step in, because maybe it might be out of line, but not treated with abuse if it's tapping into its natural instincts to attack. But then I also think of, Jackass shows and like Wild Boys, where they would go into the wild and interact with animals, and you watch it and it's funny, but then there are moments you're like, wait, is that abuse to the animals? I mean, I'm pretty sure this is Wild Boys, where like, Steve-O, they would get like sea cucumbers, and I'm pretty sure it's a sea cucumber. If you rub it, a lot, like, a fluid comes out of it, so it's like a dirty joke. But then you might not think of sea cucumber as an animal, but that is abuse because it is a living organism. So, so then to me, that's like one of those moments where I was just saying, like, you hope that maybe it's not harmful. You hope while watching something like, I love the comedy of Wild Boys and Jackass, but you hope the animals involved really aren't in harm's way. They fight with bulls, and the bulls, I mean, they're the ones fighting them, but you have no idea what kind of damage it could be doing to them in the long run. Yeah,
especially running head on, and think about the animal bites, the spiders, the snakes, all the weird bites they've gotten over time. And it's weird. It is a balance, because I've thought about, like, I've been almost educated about animals and their behavior because of like people like Jackass and Wild Boys growing up. But also I've used it as entertainment, and it's definitely have had animal abuse throughout that. And I was actually surprised when the most recent Jackass Forever came out that PETA or other people weren't really like criticizing them for it, because I was surprised, honestly, how much animals were used throughout this film, way more than I thought they would, especially in 2021 or 2022 when they released the film. So, I mean, it's a really good question, but then that also brings up, can we replace animals in film to get like altogether with CGI or animatronics? Like, are we at a certain point in film where that's possible, and can we do that realistically? Because I brought up most recently with Harrison Ford a film called Call of the Wild, which came out in 2020, where he acted basically next to a man wearing a green suit, and they kind of used CGI to turn that performance into a dog named Buck. So,
which people didn't like.
People didn't like. I mean, when you look at certain shots of that film, it looks photorealistic, but it is so CGI heavy that it's very clear that he's just talking to no one, right? So, like, I just don't think we're at that point. It's a really hard thing to talk about. I think guns and film are pretty similar. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's this, like, we still need animals if we want to accurately portray like the real life that we're living, especially for me. I mean, I want as little CGI to kind of interrupt the film for me as much as possible, and I want it to be like naturally introduced and organically like woven into a film. So it is really hard, especially if it's so central to what the film is. And when it comes to that, I think animation is the key, like you said. Like, that's why a lot of these films are animation. They don't have to like rely on these real actors. So is there anything else, Ben, that you really want to add on? Can we even ask the question whether animals can have a worthy performance or not? Is that possible?
You know, it's funny you say that, because I guess they could, but you would also have to be guaranteed that they weren't abused while making it. And then that, I think, ties back into what we're talking about today, which is the greatest show on earth, and which is about a circus. And I think it's pretty well known the circus abused animals to provide the quote unquote worthy performances that people enjoy, that's entertainment. And I think that that's why we wanted to talk about it, because this movie treats the circus as this glorious thing. And people do treat the circus as a glorious thing, but also it's not so glorious behind the scenes. And while this film tries to peek behind the curtains a little bit, it makes it seem so happy-go-lucky when in reality it's not so happy-go-lucky. And we're going to dive into that more, but it's just something I think to bring it back to, is that the circus is something that's well known and documented now, that was a place of animal abuse, which is kind of been horrifying to think about it as like, well, then people didn't really care enough because they still voted it to win Best Picture. So I think that leads into my question to you, John, which is The Greatest Show on Earth worthy of the Best Picture award of 1952?
The Greatest Show on Earth. The dramatic lives of trapeze artists, a clown, and the circus manager, as told against a background of circus spectacle.
Brad Braden is the no-nonsense general manager of the world's largest railroad circus. The show's board of directors plans to run a short 10-week season rather than risk losing $25,000 a day in a shaky post-war economy. Brad bargains to keep the circus on the road as long as it makes a profit, thus keeping the 1,400 performers and roustabouts employed. In addition to keeping the show in the black, he faces some other serious problems.
Brad's first problem is his girlfriend, Holly, a flyer who expects to star in the show. He must tell her that she is out of the center ring. The management insisted on hiring the great Sebastian, a world-class trapeze artist. Holly is furious. She is also heartbroken because Brad refuses to acknowledge his love for her.
Brad's second problem is Sebastian, the debonair king of the air, a ladies' man whose affairs always cause trouble for the show's managers, to the point a board member declares he's wrecked every show he's been with. His third problem is Harry, a crooked midway concessionaire who works for a gangster named Mr. Henderson.
Trouble is also brewing for beloved Buttons the Clown, who never appears without his makeup. During one performance, Button is warned by his mother that they are asking questions. Button's skill as a first aid suggests a medical background. Holly finds a newspaper article about a mercy killer. but does not connect the doctor who killed his wife to Buttons.
Sebastian arrives and is greeted by two former lovers, Angel, who performs in the Elephant Act with her pathologically jealous Klaus, and Phyllis, who does a double turn as an iron jaw artist and a vocalist in a South Seas extravaganza. Sebastian is attracted to Holly and offers her the center ring. When Brad refuses, Holly vows to make her ring the focus of attention. The competition between the aerialists becomes increasingly daring and dangerous. The duel ends when Sebastian removes his safety net and suffers serious injuries in a fall when a stunt goes wrong. Holly finally has the center ring and start billing, but not the way she wanted it.
When Harry is caught cheating customers on the Midway, Brad fires him. Harry vows revenge. He is seen now and then on the periphery of the show, shooting crap and sowing disaffection, particularly with Klaus. Several months later, Sebastian rejoins the show. His right arm is paralyzed. A guilt-ridden Holly professes her love for her former rival over the unfeeling Brad. Angel calls Holly a fool for busting up the swellest guy in the circus and makes a pass at Brad. They become an item. Klaus cannot accept that Angel does not want him and threatens to hurt her during an elephant show. Brad quickly intervenes to save Angel and fires Klaus.
At one stand, Special Agent Gregory of the FBI appears on the lot during teardown and asks Brad whether the circus doctor resembles a man he is hunting. Brad has never seen Buttons without makeup and does not recognize the man in the photo. The detective boards the train to continue his investigation. Buttons tells Brad that Sebastian has feeling in his injured hand, which Sebastian takes as a sign that his disability is not permanent. Brad makes the connection and casually observes that the police will be taking fingerprints at the next stand. He implies to Buttons he should make himself scarce until Gregory leaves the show to search elsewhere.
Harry and Klaus stop the first of the circus's two trains to steal the day's receipts. Klaus sees the second section coming and realizes that Angel is aboard. He drives the automobile head-on towards the train in an attempt to signal the engineer to stop the train. The second section smashes the car off the tracks, killing Klaus and Harry in the process, and crashes into the first section in a spectacular collision that derails train cars, breaks animal cages open, shreds equipment, and injures people by the score. Brad is pinned in the wreckage, bleeding from a cut artery.
Buttons tries to slip away from the wreck site, but Holly pleads with him to save the man she loves. Buttons gives Brad a direct transfusion from Sebastian, who has the same rare blood type. Gregory assists him. Later, Special Agent Gregory reluctantly arrests Button, shaking his hand before handcuffing him and telling him, "You're all right." Buttons tells Brad to tell Holly that he will be keeping a date with his girl, suggesting that he may be facing the death penalty.
Holly takes command of the show, mounting a parade that leads the whole nearby town to an open-air performance. Brad now realizes how much he loves Holly, but ironically she now has no time for him because the show must go on. Sebastian proposes to Angel and she accepts. The movie ends with the circus making a magnificent recovery from disaster to continue on the tour.
The Greatest Show on Earth was directed by Cecil B. DeMille.
Written by Frederick M. Frank, Bear Linden, Theodore St. John, with additional story credits for Frank Cavett and the additional writer uncredited Jack Garris.
Produced by Cecil B. DeMille and Henry Wilcoxon.
Music by Victor Young.
Cinematography by George Barnes.
Film editing by Ann Bouchins.
Art direction by Hal Pereira and Walter H. Tyler.
Costume design by Edith Head, Dorothy Jenkins, and Miles White.
Special credits note that the picture was produced with the cooperation of Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, John Ringling North President, Henry Ringling North Vice President, Arthur M. Concello General Manager, and Pat Valdo General Director of Performance.
The Greatest Show on Earth stars Betty Hutton as Holly,
Cornell Wilde as the Great Sebastian,
Charlton Heston as Brad Braden,
James Stewart as Buttons, a clown,
Dorothy Lamour as Phyllis,
Gloria Graham as Angel,
Henry Wilcoxon as FBI Agent Gregory,
Lawrence Tierney as Mr. Henderson,
Lyle Betger as Klaus,
Frank Wilcox as the Circus Doctor,
John Kellogg as Harry,
and Cecil B. DeMille as the uncredited narrator. So before we get into the discussion, I actually just wanted to read this quote. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. My father came to tell me, "I'm going to take you to the greatest show on earth." My father explained that they were going to be lion tamers and circus acts, clowns and trapeze artists. And we walk into a dimly lit room. It felt like a place of worship, a synagogue. I still didn't understand about the greatest show on earth. There were seats, not bleachers, all facing forward. There was a large red curtain. It opened, and there was an image, and I realized that my father had not taken me to the circus, but to a movie about a circus. The first movie I had ever seen, Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth. The feeling of disappointment lasted about 10 minutes, and then I was a victim of the drug called cinema. I was no longer in this church. I became part of an experience. And that was said by Steven Spielberg, and that was him reflecting on the first film he ever watched, which was the 1952 Best Picture winner, The Greatest Show on Earth, which he still continues to cite as an influence on him in his early days of cinema. So I wanted to just read that quote out for everyone, let that sink in to what we are about to talk about, because we definitely have some different feelings than Steven Spielberg about this movie.
Well, this is interesting because he's 6 or 7 years old, so it's like the magic of understanding cinema. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised he has those memories still. I mean, maybe it's one of those kind of like partially fabricated memories where you add to it just over time, because I can't really say that I remember that many things from when I was 6 and 7, but it sounds like he was more so and fell in love with movies at this time and like what cinema could do and really the magic of a movie theater to me, more so than I love The Greatest Show on Earth, you know?
Yeah.
He's not really directly praising the film itself, but more so like the magic and the whole experience itself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like, it definitely is the idea of a film being this grand thing and how you can enjoy it as a kid. And for him growing up, the only entertainment you really had was the radio, maybe 1 or 2 TV channels, and the movies. And we grew up in a time of just constant, things in front of us, constant screens, constant entertainment going on. So I don't blame him or us for never having that kind of experience with a movie. Like, I can certainly remember when I was in movie theaters when I was young, but never something like this specific and this, like, I think beautiful to say about movie theaters at a young age. But let's jump into The Greatest Show on Earth, because there's certainly a lot, and there's certainly not a lot to break down. So I think the biggest thing for me starting off of talk about this movie is it feels more like 3 different movies in one. So the first movie, which I will call the best one, we have Buttons the Clown. It's a mystery thriller story of a doctor who did something for his love and is now a clown in hiding. Maybe it could have been its own movie that featured more of him escaping and doing other things, as he's on the run, but ultimately finding the circus to hide. 2, which is a documentary, which I will call the interesting one, which is about the circus and its season's operations and kind of glorifying the behind-the-scenes aspects of the circus and then showing off the performances that happen from day to day. And then there's the third one, which is the romantic love triangle, which I call the male one, where the common goal of this love triangle is to help the circus survive, but really it's just kind of a bloated love story that does not feel authentic or real at all, just puffy and exactly what you would get from early, Hollywood cinema when it comes to love triangles. Almost reminiscent of an early film we once watched called Wings.
Yeah, Broadway Melody, Wings. I mean, there's a lot of love triangles that we've seen already. But yeah, I would say it's probably the worst love triangle we've seen yet because the characters are the least fleshed out and least compelling, to be honest.
Which says a lot because considering the Broadway Melody, like that love triangle.
Yeah, is barely anything.
Yeah, and I think that's actually interesting because I think the quality of this acting is almost the quality of the acting in that movie specifically.
Well, I think there's some standouts. I mean, I definitely have that feeling for some of the acting, and especially earlier on in the film, like there's like the board meeting and Brad, played by Charlton Heston, who's this very stern, unforgiving man, and I was shocked, and this hurts to say because I know Charlton Heston is such an iconic figure in Hollywood, but I think this might be the worst leading actor performance that we've seen in a Best Picture yet.
I would kind of have to agree, and then I realized when I was like transcribing my notes to our outline for every for this episode, as we do for every episode, I realized I only wrote one note for Brad, and that was Brad being trapped is good tension, which is at the way end of the movie.
Oh, like being trapped under the actual train and everything?
Yeah. And so for me, like a 2.5 hour movie where he's in it a good amount, there's definitely some, good key scene, or not good. I'll say there's some key scenes with him. And he just does nothing for me. He's just there. Like, seems stern, but it's so there's just nothing. And he's such and in the synopsis they call him unfeeling. He really is unfeeling.
He
like
really
like
is,
he's
yeah.
supposed to be the boyfriend of Holly, but he could give less of a shit whatever she's doing. He just cares about the circus going, which I guess is a personality trait, but it's not an interesting enough personality trait where I'm like, oh, you're fun and interesting, and I would like to hear and listen more from you.
Well, I'll tell you why it's not interesting. I mean, if you have this character who like loves his career, and let's say it's the circus in this case, loves the circus and wants it to like truly succeed and make all of the money and make the suits happy, but also make everyone in the circus happy, there's got to be some reason as to why. Why does he care about the circus? Why does he not really care that much about the people, but he kind of does sometimes? Why does he even really care that he has to make money for these people? None of it really makes sense. It just, he says he has to do this, and he has to listen to the suits, and he has to succeed in this circus just because he has to. Just because he's telling us he has to is why he has to. And they don't really give any kind of backstory or kind of allude to it, and it's just played so flat and so straight. And it's not just Heston's performance. I mean, there's definitely some clunky, awkward scenes throughout this movie, and it's just he falls so flat. Like you said, he doesn't show any like remote interest in his love interest, multiple love interests, in fact, until really the last like 10 minutes of the movie. And at that point, it's played as a joke. So it's like, why did we invest so much time into this love story for it to just not even have a successful ending? They really just wrap up the ending so quickly. But, I mean, there's some bad performances in here, but a clown, Buttons, a clown, not Buttons the clown, played by James Stewart, I think is a phenomenal performance. I mean, I really, really love this character, and I love James Stewart playing a clown. I mean, who would have expected that, right?
I definitely would have expected that, and I think when I first saw this movie, not looking much into it beforehand, and then just seeing that come across the screen, I was like, hold on a second. Because it's not, when you think of the fact that the James Stewart's two movies that are the two best picture winners that he was in, it was You Can't Take It With You and The Greatest Show on Earth, which is just not, I guess, what you would expect, but hey, it's just the facts. And so it's certainly an interesting role, and I think what's even funnier about it is the fact that he was willing to be paid scale for this movie, which is like, there's either that's just a lie if someone said that, or he was just like, oh, this is just fucking stupid, I really got to do this type of thing.
I feel like he just found the character interesting. I mean, like, playing a character that has a hidden secret, I think is already really compelling from a point of view. Plus, you get the clown aspect of it, where you have to be like fun, loving, entertaining, while also kind of balancing this dark past. Like, he's killed a person. He's not only killed a person, but he's killed the love of his life because she had terminal cancer, I believe they specifically say.
So he was a mercy killer. So he killed multiple people. He would kill people who just didn't want to live anymore because they were sick. And as a doctor, I guess like he did that, which there's a whole moral debate for if that's, I know people debate about that even today. So let's just push that to the side. But that's why he was like on the run, because he was mercy killing people, which again, like that on its own, sounds so fascinating. And like that would be pretty compelling. That would be a pretty dark, maybe it could be like a black comedy, I guess, in its own way. Because, how can you not have a clown and not have it be a little funny?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to kind of balance that tone, but that's the kind of tragic aspect of this, is that he can't really reveal his true self, and he has to kind of put on this show constantly, and he's really good at it too, and not just as a performer, but like this character is really good at being a clown. He's really good at hiding and not revealing who he really is, and we get like a great scene early on in the film where he sees his mother in the audience, and you can just see like we're experiencing so much of this parade and in a circus, and it's showing us a lot. And this is what the film does constantly, is kind of show us reference material of a circus and then kind of cut to our characters to kind of make it an actual film and an actual story. And we have this reveal that his mom tells him that they're being, people are looking for him, and to just kind of keep an eye out. And this is where you kind of learn more about him and start to question his motives and where he comes from. And that's just a really interesting thing to do with a character. And it makes the film worse because this is such an interesting character that even the other characters kind of get brought down, because they are doing nothing with these characters. It's so clear that they like love story. This person loves that girl. That guy also loves that girl. Like they're just like kind of pulling this story together, but it's so clear that like the real interest and the real passion was definitely behind Buttons a Clown. But they don't give him that much time, right? It's only like 10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah, it's not as much screen time. I think that part of me thinks that maybe this was like shoehorned in at some point, that they kind of like, well, how do we like what the, because it seems like upon learning more about DeMille's like style and directing was that he was like an executive, and so for him it was like, well, how do I make the company like a film? How do I make it interesting? How do I make it compelling? How can I fit in all this different stuff, whether it's from the technical aspects to the story? But to him, the story probably wasn't as important as showing the wow factor of the circus and showing off colors using Technicolor cameras. So to him, it was more about, it seemed like for this movie, the technology of what he can use rather than the story. And so then when you get Buttons the Clown, it's like, maybe I just need something to make it a little bit more compelling, to add a little more, whether emotion, tension, because the moment where Buttons does see his mother, there's this beautiful song that's being sung, and it's actually a very emotional part, and it's a song called Only a Rose to Whisper. So the lyrics go, only a rose I give you, only a song dying away, only a smile to keep in memory, until we meet another day, only a rose to whisper, blushing as roses do. I'll bring along a smile or a song for anyone, only a rose for you. Like those lyrics are really beautiful, and the way it's sung is really nice. And then, James Stewart's just, James Stewart, so he just hits home runs like it's nothing. And so, it's a really sweet and endearing moment, and then you get pulled and sucked right back into the just mess of the rest of the movie. So it is unfortunate because like there's something there, but to the people making the film, it was more like the wow factor of the circus. Like that's what they wanted more of the attention on.
Yeah, I was really trying to think of like other films to compare this to, and I just don't think I could really nail down what it is, because this film is trying to have like an overall view of what it is and what it feels like to be in the circus, to watch the circus, really to kind of experience everything, the behind the scenes, the packing up everything. So when you say it's like a documentary, it's because at times it almost feels like a documentary. I mean, we have our director come on and talk to us, basically describing what's happening, describing the chaos of a circus, like and we're seeing shots of them packing up the circus, building the circus. And what I think is really fascinating, I mean, you probably take all these out and it would probably make a 30-minute like mini documentary all about the circus, and it would be really compelling and really interesting to watch, because it really is showing you things you probably would never see otherwise. So I found it really compelling. It just doesn't really mix as well as it should,
Yeah, well, I totally agree. Like it doesn't mix well, but it is, that's why I called it the interesting one, because it's actually it's really compelling to see how they put it together and how they do glorify the circus, brushing away the abuse behind the scenes, but it is still compelling. And they start out with this narration from DeMille.
We bring you the circus, the Pied Piper whose magic tunes lead children of all ages from 6 to 60 into a tinsel and spun candy world of reckless beauty and mounting laughter, whirling thrill, of rhythm, excitement, and grace, of daring and blaring and dance, of high-stepping horses and high-flying stars. But behind all this, the circus is a massive machine whose very life depends on discipline, motion, and speed. A mechanized army on wheels that rolls over any obstacle in its path, that meets calamity again and again, but always comes up smiling. A place where disaster and tragedy stalk the big top, haunt the backyard, and ride the circus train. Where death is constantly watching for one frayed rope, one weak link, or one trace of fear. A fierce, primitive fighting force that smashes relentlessly forward against impossible odds. That is the circus. And this is the story of the biggest of the big tops, and of the men and women who fight to make it the greatest show on earth.
That's very raw, and definitely passionate about the subject, but it's also very admitting that like there's a lot of shit that can go wrong here, and whether we're going to describe to you what that is or just blatantly say like people can die. People can fall from where they are. There's high flying acts. There's constant motion and speed, and this thing just keeps on going until bam, it hits you, which kind of like the end where the trains hit each other. So it's an interesting open to kind of phrase the circus like this.
Yeah, I feel like this happens 3 times throughout the movie. There's like this moment introducing us, the middle section, which I think is about packing and moving the circus and building it, and then we have it a little bit at the end, I believe. So it's trying to like kind of frame our story, but what we also get from the story is kind of wandering and kind of meanders throughout the circus, and we'll just have random shots of like characters getting ready or getting undressed or getting dressed and putting on their uniform, or we watch a parade for like 15 minutes of this movie because it's just cool to see what the parade would look like. And this is such a hard film to describe because in a lot of ways it's almost not even like a fiction film. It's so much of a documentary mixed in with this fictional elements that it creates this weird kind of hybrid about the circus in general. And that really brought me to kind of think a lot about of the circus acts, like whether they were just trained stuntmen. It didn't seem like that when we were researching. It seemed like it was a lot of actual performers from the circus that they brought in to perform all these things. So it makes it even feel more like it's a documentary. I mean, using the actual people that do this. And we see so much of the circus throughout this that I wanted to ask you if there was like a particular part of the circus or a particular performance that you really loved of just the circus in general.
I think that the trapeze scenes are tense, but also I just have issues with that because it's just the way it's shot, and because
let's talk about that.
The way it's shot and the green screen aspects of it, it really pulls me out. They shoot it from a low angle because of necessity, so you have some really cool wide shots, but then when they go tight and they go to like Cornell Wilde and Betty Hutton, it's sort of like inconsequential because you kind of know that they're okay, and they're doing these like acts, which is like, they train to do it, but also it doesn't seem as authentic as it could be compared to all the other performances they show in the movie.
Yeah, they're fun. I do feel that with the way it's shot. I mean, you're kind of locked down to the ground, so you're kind of limited as how much you can really show of this kind of performance of this act. And I mean, having it that far away does kind of add to that tension. You could see like how much of a drop it would be for them, how far up they are. And we get more of the great Sebastian, played by Cornell Wilde. And his character is pretty fun for me, honestly. Besides James Stewart, playing Buttons a clown, I think he's probably like my second favorite character because he's just having fun. He's totally such a fun, like, flirty character that he gets to like play around. He gets some like funny suave lines, and he gets this kind of tragic twist to his story that's definitely most interesting compared to any other character in this film. And he's really handsome. He's got like a great build. He's got this like backstory in the film that he used to drive tanks because he comes flying into the circus driving like a sports car, talking about how he is not used to driving such a fast car. And it's a funny, goofy scene because all the cops are following him and kind of bringing him all together. But he's our big star that's kind of brought in to kind of replace Holly in the center ring. And they have this kind of like budding romance, but it's more so Holly just kind of using Sebastian to kind of get to Brad.
Is she, though? Because
it's just unclear, but that seems like what they were trying to go for.
Which is like an issue with the love triangles because you can't tell if it seems authentic and real or if she's trying to put on an act. Yeah, because she also doesn't seem smart enough, I feel like, to pull off an act at the same time so that she actually would fall in love with this guy.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes here, I said she's just a pawn in this film for Brad and Sebastian to fawn over. Because that's really all she does.
But Brad doesn't fawn over her.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's really Sebastian, but it's like her fawning over Sebastian to get to Brad, basically. But Brad is so lifeless in this movie that he literally just does nothing. He's like, all I care about is the circus, and that's it, and making it good. But the thing with him is that there's never a problem that comes up that he's like, I need to solve. So there's no interesting aspect of his character. If he's not invested in this love story, if he keeps just saying he's invested in the circus, then like show us about something in the circus. All we get is him fighting one person who's messing up the carnival games at the circus. Like, really? That's it?
Yeah, we get that. And then, I think that what it should have been was maybe the circus should have been failing. But instead, it's like, everyone's going, everyone's having a good time. So why is this such a big, like, the whole issue they bring up at the beginning of the film with actually I think it was John Ringling North who's the actual president of the time of the Ringling Brothers Circus, was in the scene, and it was like, oh, like, who wants to go to the circus anymore? And like why would anyone want to do this? It's like, it seems like a lot of people still want to do this. So, and you never bring up this issue again. So why even bring that up in the first place, besides just adding like a moment of drama, but for Brad to be like, no, we got the great Sebastian to be in the show with us.
That explains a lot that's not an actor, because there was some really, really bad line reading in that scene with all the suits.
Yeah, it's so goofy. And I actually wrote a note before I knew it was who it was. I was like, man, this is so like goofy and nice. It seems like it should be grimier in real life.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely grimier, which is an interesting aspect. They really try to glamorize, make everything look so like bright and colorful and beautiful. And the film is kind of bright. And I know this is something that we kind of go back and forth on, that we kind of disagree with, but I kind of agree with you on a lot of parts, and how you feel like the film is kind of like muddy and dark and not as colorful and as bright as it should be.
It's very like muted, and it really takes me out of it, especially when they use like green screen effects and composite imaging, because it's not good. It does not work out well, and so it's very jarring to look at, and it seems like a mistake. It seems very amateurish. And it is just baffling to watch, because I've said it many times. I like it when these movies do something technically great and they advance it. And this just feels like DeMille being like, someone just told DeMille like, hey, we got this new technology called green screening in the back, and we kind of want to try this out. And he's like, great, I'll do it. Put it in the movie. Oh, but Mr. DeMille, I don't think it's going to. No. We're going to use it.
I think it just happens too often throughout this film where, you know, they could get away with it, and we have seen it before this in the Best Picture winner here and there, but it's just so heavily used, and to the point where it just feels like we couldn't get the circus set this day, so, you know, this whole scene is going to have to be filmed on a green or blue screen, and we're just going to have to like composite over the circus in the background and just kind of make it happen, make it work. And a lot of the film feels like that. It feels like it's kind of rushed to be put together, like there wasn't too much of an organization. It was like he set up a big event that the circus had to do that day, and he was just like, film as much as you can, basically. And then the scenes where we're actually showing performances and actors, it's like, okay, we have a script, but maybe we don't have that location. Like, you could feel the filmmaking, you know, in parts of the film, because you could just see the cracks in it. But in general, like the overall cinematography, and I think it's drastically improved when we're outside of the tent, because being locked in the big circus tent, we're just having these really harsh lights that are just kind of like pushed down, top down, so everyone doesn't really look very like pretty in terms of like showing their colors, and there's not much natural light because you're in a huge tent with no windows, no lights at all. But when we go outside and we get to see like the bright reds of the train, and we get to see all their costumes outside, I think we really get to see a lot of cool Technicolor throughout this film, and I think I definitely have to give it a nod because of that. I mean, some of the cool transitions we get from this film as well. I mean, there's some weird edits in this for sure, like some weird jump cuts that don't have any reason to be there. It felt like they just couldn't find a good time to jump or cut, so they just made such a drastic cut that's really distracting. But overall, in general, I found when we're outside, we get a lot of bright color, and we get a lot more color because of how muted it is inside the tent, and how little natural sunlight we have. So it is kind of like a yin and yang for me. At moments I was just like, wow, this looks amazing, especially when we see like the priest with the little boy saying like the prayers as the train goes by, right?
I still can't believe that was a thing, and that reading, and like that was like an actual thing that would happen, was that someone would come and bless the circus, which,
I mean,
sure,
maybe they weren't blessed when they got into a huge accident at the end. Maybe they should have been blessed.
Yeah.
But that was interesting, like, way to show it, and then the way they were kind of like cutting and doing like swipe transitions, which I don't think we've seen any kind of crazy transitions in editing yet out of any Best Picture that we've seen.
Yeah, we got some interesting things in American in Paris, but this one definitely did a little more. But I really just I just don't agree with the cinematography of this. I think that because it's so clunky with its use of Technicolor, and it's just general, just like blasé, like, okay, we'll just put the camera wide on the circus and we'll just film that for 40 minutes in total, and like that's just gonna what make it work, is just what it just doesn't do enough for me. And then you bring up the lighting, because I read differently that they lit from the bottom up, be it out of necessity. That to light it instead of the usual top down, they also Technicolor Company designed a new camera shutter for the film and combined it with electronically controlled incandescent lights hung on tent poles and to sensitize the film stock. So
probably because how dark it is in the tent, right?
Right. So it seems like they had to kind of manipulate the situation, which then is probably why they had to use green screen effects. But then if you're using green screen effects, I guess you're still trying to match the dark, muted tones of being inside, which then kind of eliminates the whole reason to probably use a green screen, which is to help brighten it and make it seem more like, more positive, more positive light. And it's really just jarring for me. And the cool like documentary style of it is certainly interesting, but then also it's very muted at times. And I don't know if that's just because the bad luck they ran into while making the movie, because they did follow the circus around to film some of its performances, but it just feels very clunky and just that, well, let's just set, like, they didn't even try to differentiate the angles. They really just focused on one side of the tent and one ring from like wide shots, and they don't manipulate it. And I guess maybe that's also because it's a live circus performance, so they couldn't, and they didn't know how to, but at the same time, it still doesn't work. And then I go back to a movie almost 20 years before this, to The Great Ziegfeld. Yes, they were able to manipulate it because it was on sound stages and it's more of a theatrical performance. But those scenes are more interesting because even though they're long, there's still like a lot more they can do with it. They change up the camera angles, they make the edits a little more purposeful. Whereas this one is just like, here's the circus, look at, and like here's huge like crowd shots, and let's go back to like one of the circus rings, then back to it wide, and back to a crowd shot, and it's just not enough for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on especially the circus performances, because it just feels like they set up a camera, they're watching everything. And when I was saying the top-down lighting, it was particular for the scenes that are showing the big running circus, because you couldn't show any lights because you're showing almost the entire like ground area of the circus. And when they're talking about lighting from down below, I'm assuming that's probably all the trapeze work that they were doing, because you would have to light above because you're shooting directly from the ground up at those people. But for me, I don't think you're giving the film enough credit, because when we go outside of the circus and it's actually trying to be a film, it's trying to like create scenes and create like actual story, like there's really cool filmmaking and really cool cinematography in here. And especially in the first like 30 minutes where we're like getting introduced to all of our characters, there's really cool walk and talks where like we're moving with the circus. There's so much going on in the background, and this isn't just like a composite shot. Like there's actual live, really, really compelling like cinematography with how much is moving on in the background. The trains are moving in the background. There's all these people carrying different things and moving different things. And at one point, a woman gets like picked up and is being carried by an elephant. And yes, we can talk about so much of like the animal abuse and how much the animals are used in this film. But when you're not really thinking about that, what I think most of the time you aren't when you're watching film, because who would be, actively thinking about that? You kind of get like lost in the circus and the magic of how much they can kind of show you and how much these animals can really do. So I don't know. I just don't think you're giving it enough credit for some of the aspects that they're actually doing. Yes, I agree with you. Like the actual circus stuff is so dull and boring, because I think that's just the way they had to do it in order to film that. But I just think there's more in this film. And I think this is a film that you could kind of really just not even like turn the audio on. I just throw it on in the background and just like watch some of like the weird images and the weird scenes and just like drink with your friends and play a board game. It's one of those movies where you don't really need to be invested in the story, but there's like some weird shit always going on in this movie. Whether it's good or bad, it's very entertaining, I think.
I can understand from like a visual standpoint that it does like interesting things visually, but that's also because it's the circus, and the circus is what's driving it. But then there are some outside shots that are cool, but then there are also some outside, like when Brad tosses Harry or Henry, whatever his name is, because it's just a random character shoehorned in there, of like when he throws him out of the circus, that looks like it was filmed in a Blue's Clues set, honestly. Like it was so jarring, and I'm like, why was that green screen? You couldn't just go outside somewhere in Hollywood, just make a mud pit and toss someone out into it, like. So like that's weird. And then we were just watching a scene when Sebastian comes back, and they go into Brad's trailer, and the doors open, so you see stuff going on in the background, and that's all composite. Why is that all composite? You couldn't like cut a trailer in half and film facing forward and with like live action going on behind you, which they do at certain parts in the beginning, but in the rest of the movie, if there's stuff going on behind them, it's all composite shots and it's all green screen. And so again, it's just so jarring, and it's like it doesn't look right. It looks like mistakes.
I mean, it definitely looks like mistakes. In a way, you could also argue that the man was ahead of his time. Like, if you were to make a movie like this with this many like green screen shots, it would not look nearly as jarring. But because we're so dated at this time, and what he's trying to do is really not plausible, and that's probably on him and his cinematographer and his whoever is working on special effects to kind of determine like whether this will look authentic, whether this will have verisimilitude where you actually believe in this and you can see past some of its flaws. But yeah, you definitely can't see past all of its flaws, and it's really hard not to notice those really jarring composite shots. But in a way, I still find them entertaining, where I don't get frustrated at it. It's more just like, wow, I can't believe they saw a couple scenes of this early on, maybe while editing, and they were just like, we have to keep doing this. Like, this is nuts, and this is weird and wacky, and it almost to me like fits the weird tone of a circus in a weird way, and that has no like actual plausibility in terms of how to explain that or explanation how I can explain that. But yes, it's not really a well-made film in those regards, for sure. I can definitely agree with that, but I find some weird charm in those aspects where it's just so bizarre and unnatural the way they're kind of composite, especially when we have characters who are actors in the film being like composited onto the actual circus, because like the lighting is so drastically different and it's so noticeable to kind of see the differences between the background and the foreground. But I still think there's more to this than just all the bad green screening.
I just think overall, like, this movie, like, the cinematography is like what bothers me the most, because again, it's using kind of a cheap way of, for 40 minutes of it, to be like, well, here's just the circus, here are the circus acts, and like that's what is gonna make it great. And like, honestly, it just feels like a Fathom event special.
Yeah, I mean, it very much is, and maybe that's like one of the best ways to describe it, because it is like a fiction film thrown into like a Fathom event special showing like a documentary footage. And that's definitely, I think you could do that today and make a film like this. And for me, watching this film, it's 2 hours and 30 minutes. I think you could cut out 30 minutes of this film and make like a really tight 2-hour movie about the circus. And like maybe you can keep some of that voiceover in, kind of introducing and describing the circus, but cut out all the crap. We don't need like a 15-minute parade scene to see Mickey Mouse in his crackhead costume. Like, we don't need any of that to see all their dirty, disgusting costumes, because as a viewer, it's not really entertaining. But putting on my 1952 cap, I just think of being like a little Steven Spielberg, being a little boy, and like not being able to go to the circus or not being able to see the circus. And you're not thinking about the ugly green screening in the background, just like we're not thinking about how bad like the CGI was in Air Bud. We were just like, wow, look at this animal jump really high with a basketball. And yes, that's dumbing it down and making it simple and in a kid's point of view. And this was like the highest grossing movie of the year. There's like a charm here to it where you can't see this. Like, this is stuff you can't always see. And even for us now, especially how bad some of these scenes look with the green screening, like, this was probably so magical and had such a charm, and it really took you to the circus back in the day, that I completely understand why this is the highest grossing movie of that year, because it has everything that you would possibly want as a viewer back in the day. Like, it's showing you so many cool things that you could never see in your day-to-day life. And especially if you're not in one of these major cities, you're not going to see the circus. So what's your opportunity? You're going to go to your local town to see the greatest show on earth and see that projected in a theater where you can kind of experience the circus together, you know, with this audience in a film. So did you think about it at all, like in that point of view in the 50s and how you would kind of perceive this?
Yeah, I certainly do try to think about that with all the movies that we watch and where people's minds were at. And yeah, okay, like, this is the highest grossing film of the year. This is like a Marvel movie of that time. This is, you know, the big blockbuster. But then I think about also like Gone with the Wind and like those special effects. And honestly, there's a green screen sequence in that, and that doesn't look as bad as this, you know? So that's why it's very troubling for me to appreciate the technical aspects and the wow factor of it without being critical of that. It still just like falls flat, and the story falls flat. The dialogue isn't that great. The script writing, I don't know. The story isn't enough, and there's like too much going on, but it's never fully fleshed out. So it's kind of just you don't like tonally. It's all over the place because again, it's a thriller, it's a documentary, it's a love story, it's action packed. There's tension, and then there's bad comic relief, and it just doesn't know what to make itself. And I think that's just because like that was accepted for movies back then. Like I don't know if a movie like that came out today would be taken seriously. It would be looked at as just pandering to audiences for a wow factor, I guess.
No, but I think this is like such a hard film to compare to what would be released nowadays, because it's like, what could you not see on the internet? You know what I mean? So it's hard to compare it to that, because this is such a different time where you're so limited to what you can have access to even seeing, that you couldn't just make a circus film and just find it that interesting and have it do that well. And it's funny because we haven't mentioned The Greatest Showman, right?
The Greatest Showman.
The Greatest Showman, starring Hugh Jackman, which is, my apologies, an awful musical, but was one of like the longest consecutively like running box office success story of that year. I think it was like 2019, if I'm remembering correctly, and it was really popular. And I know it borrows things from the Ringling Brothers Circus, and I keep every time I read The Greatest Show on Earth, I just sing, "This is the greatest show." Like, and I like, oh my God, I really hated that movie so much. And that is also a movie that is like a bunch of different movies in one. But it's funny that you were saying that you could remake this movie, and this isn't really the same thing. It's a Broadway, more like musical, full-blown musical showing everything, and they don't really connect in any other way that it's a circus and they have a similar name. But just a funny little thing that I wanted to point out and kind of talk about. Something else that's interesting to me, just in film in general, now that we're getting into the 50s, the last film we did was An American in Paris, so we didn't really get to see a lot of the 50s iconography that I'm used to, the American 50s iconography. And now we're finally in the 50s, right? And we're in a setting that I feel like we are to the point where we have some sort of connection. And this is kind of like a vague understanding of this, and maybe you'll agree or disagree. Growing up, I have like a pretty strong connection with antiques. I grew up in like Pennsylvania, and they have a strong love of like history and antiques, and that's a very like iconic, Americana state as well. So growing up, I was around a lot of things that were like from the 50s and 60s, like the old Coke bottles and the Coke machine. And my grandpa's like both loved collecting things. One of them was in World War II. So like, I think we're finally getting to the point in these films now where we have this like actual physical, tangible connection in a way. Yes, this is 70 years ago. We're not close into like the terms of age, but I'm getting the sense, and now that we have this color film as well, in Technicolor, where we're seeing some of the color and we're seeing some of the styles, we're getting to the point where we're like seeing some of the styles that we're kind of used to in America, and some of the weird antiques that I just loved growing up. So I think part of this film also has that connection for me, which I just love the clothing. I love the way the trains look. It's like so Americana to me and beautiful, and these bright red colors scream America to me. So I really love that. And I think of at the very end, which we'll definitely gotta focus and talk about the train sequence at the end. I love the interiors of the trains. Like, they're really beautiful and cool. And I think this is where we get to see a lot of the Technicolor with the really cool costumes and the 50s Coke machine that's set up in that train. So a rambly, just weird thought. I don't really go into that much personal stuff in relation, but there's like this connection I felt with this film and in the way it kind of represented the 50s, I guess. Because, last film, in American Paris, we didn't really get that because it was so overly stylized, and it felt like it was all just from sets, Hollywood backlots.
Yeah, we're definitely going to keep entering that territory as we keep progressing forward. And I think some of that is because of our parents. Our parents were born, I think, at least another decade or so later. But just saying the fact that, like, that's what they kind of looked at. That's what their parents had growing up, So I definitely understand that sentiment of that. You see this iconography, you see Americana a lot in this movie. It's definitely there. Is it enough for me, again, to really want to sink my teeth into this film? Not really, but it's still like fun and fascinating to look at and to see the progression forward of time. And in the way things are stylized and antiques. It's definitely interesting that and fun that we are reaching that point with the movies that we're watching.
I want to talk a little bit more about the great Sebastian, right? So he's an pretty important character for our plot here. He's like the star-studded guy, comes in, takes over the spot. He's flirting with Holly. And we get to a point where he's continuing to try to flirt with her. She thinks she has this chance with Brad. And he gets to the point where he's like, I got to one-up her. I got to do this crazy trick, and she'll madly fall in love with me, right? And it's like such a middle school point of view. Like, damn, if only I had, like if I got this cool kick on the soccer field and like Stacy saw that kick, like Stacy's going to be mine. Like it's such a childhood point of view of like how to win over a woman. It's like, I'm going to do this cool trapeze flip and then Holly's going to love me. She's going to marry me because of that. And that's basically how deep our characters are. And you might be surprised because I'm always the one who's just like, I love characters and I love story and I really want to have compelling stories and characters. But I think for what this film was going for, I just knew that that's not what their real goal was. And to say that's okay is also to kind of go against what I've always said. But this film just feels larger than just trying to tell a story. And I think The Great Sebastian is a part of that story where we see his final performance where he's really trying to show off for Holly. And he's doing this like flip through a ring hoop, and then he's supposed to grab onto the other rope basically on the other side. And what I laughed out loud, because a lot of these trapeze scenes are really dramatic and really tense. Like you really don't know if they're going to fall or not. Characters keep saying how dangerous it is. And, we have the net, but at points they remove the net, and that's exactly what the Great Sebastian does. And he falls down magnificently as he misses catching the rope, and he just falls all the way down. But here we have another composite, I think. I mean, it is so bizarre looking that this is what I'm trying to explain with the issues and the failures of the green screening and issues like that almost add to the entertainment of this movie. And this is the perfect example of it, because he falls in what is supposed to be the ground, right? Really dangerous ground because he's like 30 feet up, but you can see that he's falling into a net that is like in the ground because of the way they like composited it, right? Like, is that how you could describe it?
It looks like that they had maybe like a cushion underneath, and that the net kind of like caught him and brought him down. Into a cushion, and and I find it funny because it feels like if they just shaved off that 1 second.
Yes, it's 1 second off, right?
It's like 1 second, and it wouldn't seem as goofy. It would seem like he actually did hit the ground.
With like a impact boom, like a sound effect. Because it's like almost quiet when he falls. So it's like supposed to be like really dramatic and tense.
Yeah, and it's kind of unbelievable that you would survive something like that. He falls straight onto his arm and neck, and he's literally bleeding from the mouth. And that's what really takes you out, because it's like that's not real. He definitely would have died.
It is so funny though, and it's something that I don't even get angry at, because I'm like, that was amazing. I'm so glad I got to see that. It is. I don't know how to describe it, honestly, guys. You guys need to go out and watch this movie just for this scene alone, because I don't know what they did to make it look this way. I don't know if they like instead of a green screen background, did they like paint the cushion and the net green and then try to composite it out, because that's kind of what it looked like. And it is so jarring and weird, and it's worth watching just for this scene alone. So the Great Sebastian gets severely injured, right? Because he falls. He's gone for a while. He gets to walk out on his own. He gets that man strength to get up and to walk out and be the man that he wants to be. So he's gone for the film for a while, and later on he comes back. He seems happy. He seems like he's coming back to kind of join the circus again. But he reveals to Brad that, Brad, I'm going to this other circus because they recruited me. Brad's getting all pissy just because that's all he does in this movie is just be angry and pissed off. And he's basically getting angry, and I think it's either him or Holly who rips off his coat to reveal that...
Oh, Brad rips it off.
Yeah, that he has like a crippled hand, which it's obviously very offensive now to just kind of like show an actor just like faking this injury, but like I guess it's of the time. You're not going to find someone, and you have to show that like before and after transition. It is kind of goofy. I don't know how you took this reveal, because it is one of like the most dramatic reveals that we have in the movie. How did you feel about this?
Yeah, it's pretty goofy with how it just is revealed, and then it's like, oh, like that's all you suffered was just a crippled hand. and it just feels very like it doesn't match up with what's going on. I don't think it was like that offensive for him to be portrayed like that, but maybe I'm not picking up on something there.
No, I don't really think it's offensive. I mean, if you're showing an injury in film, I think you just have to kind of portray what you think this injury would look like. And I'm sure they base it off of like other injuries of like really mangled up broken arms or something like that. I don't know, something really disturbing.
Of people who have survived trapeze stunts like that.
Yeah, it could just be like falls, like large falls, and it's just really goofy looking because the way he's holding it is like really crunched up to his side, and it's like facing towards like the camera.
Looks like a villain holding it.
Yeah, exactly. It makes him look like really villainous.
Come here.
Really villainous and goofy. But then at the same time, his character has this like kind of charming change to him. He's not as like confident, so he loses that side of him, becomes kind of softer and sweeter in general, and he begins just to be like a helping hand around the circus, which I found that to be kind of an interesting change and take on his character. But moving forward into the story, because I'm sure there's not too much else that you want to hit on this movie.
I mean, like, I can't break down like circus performances
because a lot of it is just those performances,
right? And I think to again tie it back to the beginning when we were talking about animal abuse, is like you watch all these performances, you watch these elephant tricks happening, and you're just like, no, God, please just stop, because you know those elephants were abused to like put their, to go on their two legs and put their front two legs on the elephant in front of it so they can walk in a circle. These horses were abused because of how they also had to stay on their two legs. That a dog had to jump onto a moving horse as it's running around in a circle. And it's so abusive that it takes you right out, and it's just in your face for so long. It
is really in your face, but like we were kind of trying to describe, but it's really hard. There's that dual nature of like also still being entertained by some of these aspects. And I think one of the most like engaged and entertaining moments while using the animals is a scene where Angel, one of our female characters who has this kind of another love triangle with Brad, is basically having a foot because Klaus, this kind of villainous guy who's in love with her, but she's falling in love with Brad. He's angry at that. So in a performance that they have together in front of everyone, live in front of the circus, he's basically forcing this elephant to like press its foot down on her head, which is like extremely dark for this movie. Like it is definitely like the darkest moment I think in this entire film, and it kind of hits on an aspect of this film that like this could have went this direction. It could have showed you more into how like dark and kind of gothic this could be, but it doesn't. But at that moment I found it really tense. It's disturbing. Like she realizes what's happening, and he's like clearly trying to antagonize her and almost kill her. Like he's not afraid to like fully make this elephant crush her head. And I found it to be a really engaging, dramatic scene for sure, even though we don't really care too much about these characters. I thought it was a really interesting premise and something that I don't think I've ever seen before.
Well, it's funny you say we don't care about her, because I actually think that Gloria Graham, who plays Angel, like she was actually one of the better performances of the film.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah, so that scene is really tense, and she actually had to perform that stunt, and it's actually one of the only times that Brad shows some kind of emotion and some kind of like initiative to be like, no, you can't do that, and Klaus, you get out of here. That's my Charlton Heston impression. You get out of here.
Okay, I shat on him for a lot, and I do think this is an awful performance.
Oh, it's so bad.
I do stand by this is probably the worst like main acting performance that we've gotten so far. But man, Charlton Heston's voice is just amazing, but it makes it even more frustrating because I'm like, dude, what you're saying is so dumb, and your line delivery is so bad at times, but your voice is like incredible. Like it is so iconic. Almost.
I think another thing to remember is this is also one of his first movies.
Well, there you go. I mean, that explains
like
it.
For why, but also it's like, but then only 1959 he wins Best Actor for Ben-Hur. So this is 7 years later. He goes from what we think is a shitty performance to what people call one of the better acting performances ever done. So I don't know.
It could be DeMille, like his just direction, and you kind of tell me a little bit about the way he kind of directed. You were telling me a little bit about this beforehand, but
yeah. So people kind of look at DeMille and kind of say, he was a great silent film director, and that he was able to transition. And I think that people give him a lot of credit for how he was able to survive. Obviously, he's iconic from Sunset Boulevard. I'm ready for my close-up now, Mr. DeMille. He's definitely ingratiated. I mean, he was part of the founding of the Academy, so he's definitely there in terms of like royalty and of filmmaking. But then there are some like directors who look back and like, well, he's kind of just more for the show, and he's kind of more just to have the wow factor rather than the actual, what some might say is the most important stuff, which is the story. And I kind of agree with that, and I'm not shitting on DeMille at all. Like, I think I love the Ten Commandments. I think that his like biblical epics are certainly fascinating, and I give a lot of props to that. But I also think that his way he directs actors is kind of, it's a little shaky. And I'm just researching about him was that he rarely did give direction to actors. He preferred to quote office direct, where he would work with actors in his office, going over characters and reading through scripts in the office rather than on set, which is certainly different approach for how you should do it. And so he's definitely more for the wow factor for things, but he's not one of those like directors like an Elia Kazan who's coming up at this time, or a Fred Zinnemann, who they're so focused on the character, they're so focused on the story that is what should drive a movie, where DeMille's just like, nah, let's just have big crazy sets, a crazy chain sequence, have the circus going.
Yeah, he's looking for like as much kind of visceral action and effects, and it's almost like he's trying to like push the boundaries of cinema in this film in a way that isn't always good, obviously, as we've described, but he doesn't really have that particular style like a Capra or a Ford or some of these directors that we've kind of hit on and that we've seen and seen some of their films in their catalog, that you can see the trends in some of the stories and the storytelling, and especially in some of their auteur style of filmmaking.
Well, he definitely has a style, though, which is just this grandiose style of filmmaking.
Sure, I think you could say that,
to make it big, to make it grand. It's like a circus. It's there for the entertainment rather than for the substance and the art form. And I'm not. It's not trying to be critical of DeMille, but when this is the movie that wins Best Picture, this is the one the Academy was like, we got to give it to this guy. It's a little shaky. It's a little questionable.
Well, there's nothing bigger and explosive in this film than its climax. When it comes to all of our characters on a train, we have this kind of pseudo villain that's become our villain out of nowhere, and he wants to basically steal all the money from the train cars. He makes a mistake because he's in love with Angel, and he makes a mistake thinking it's one car instead of the other, and he ends up getting crushed in his car. Him and Klaus and Henry in their car get destroyed by the train, which I thought was hysterical.
It's pretty funny.
Is one of those shots again that is like, oh my god, everyone who loves movies needs to see this shot. It is crazy and bonkers. And then we have, hands down, the greatest train crash sequence I have ever seen in my entire life. And this is, again, that balance of the awful animal abuse. And I think we really see it here, because we see every cart, basically, of this train crash and crumble, and so many different angles of the models of this train flipping and turning. And we see the animal carts of the train kind of crash and break open. And live action, we're seeing these carts like explode, and like lions or jaguars like climb out of it. And I don't understand how the hell they did any of this. Like, I read into it, and they were using models trying to like show this destruction. But when it comes to them actually blowing up these sets and animals coming out of, like, talking about animal abuse, there's not more clear animal abuse directly on screen than like seeing explosions right in front of animals and them having to like crawl through the destruction of those explosions.
Yeah, they have like a train car fall. You can maybe it was on like a wire, like a foot above the ground, but it still had to fall and still have live animals inside it to then crawl out of it. That's disturbing. They have live animals on set probably going through, like, walking over rubble, and that's not safe conditions for a lion to be walking around with other people around as well. So it just seems very unsafe. And that is clear animal abuse, which is how they did use the animals in this train sequence. But then you look at the other side of it, and you look at the people that were in it, and kind of it looks almost like a ride, like a stunt ride you would see at like Universal Studios, to show off like, this is how stunt work is done. This is how crazy like sequences are, and like destruction sequences are done. And like, that's fascinating to look at. It's kind of like impressive for the time.
Kind of impressive. It is so impressive. Are you kidding me? This train sequence is unreal. I was literally like gasping at this scene because of how insane this is. It is so cool. I just like want to play this on a loop. Like, obviously all the animal shit is so bad, it's disgusting, but like what they do here is like unbelievable. I like couldn't believe that they did this.
I feel like such a Brad right now because I'm just like, okay.
And it's so funny because we started this talking about Spielberg, his connection to this, and what would be the second best crash sequence of all time? Super 8, which is produced by Spielberg, directed by J.J. Abrams, and it's just unbelievable how similar they are. And I can't see this and not think that Spielberg directly had his hand here to like recreate this iconic moment for him and this iconic film for him to then be like, let's do it. Let's see what this modern era can do and advance in our technology with CGI, and let's show off this crazy Super 8 explosion of a train sequence. So I really had to stop and talk about this sequence because I think it's, again, one of these moments that I was really in awe of, and I was literally saying out loud, like, wow, like I can't believe that they did this and they like made such a crazy train crash sequence. I was really, really blown away by this.
I'm such a curmudgeon because I'm just like, well, the one in Book of Boba Fett was kind of cooler.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't feel. I don't know why I didn't feel like, oh my God. I was kind of just like, oh yeah, look at that model train that they just blew up. Look at it. Like it's cool. It's definitely cool and it's fascinating because you appreciate the effort that goes into it. You appreciate that they thought of this and the creativity to pull it off. But then at the same time, it's on a model train set. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that's a toy car getting flipped up into the air.
Yeah, of course. You know that it's not a real train, right?
No, well, yeah. No, I know it wasn't a real train, but I also, it seems, and this is, I think, just a fault of a modern viewer watching these old movies. I'm so, inundated with cool special effects and CGI, and I've seen cool explosions, and I think of Star Wars, I think of Marvel movies, I think of like the Titanic sinking. You think of all these other big things that happen, and even stuff that happens only a few years later, and you're kind of just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with more. I'm so about having a real tangible thing that you're recording and filming, and I think this is such an issue with a lot of just films these days, is the over reliance and abundance of using CGI for everything. And I think you could even look at this film as doing that as well, like kind of the start of doing that with the excessive use of green screening, probably out of necessity and not getting the shot or having the time for certain scenes that they wanted to. But when it comes to like a sequence like this, even today, I would rather have some crazy train or car action sequence done with model cars than a CGI car. And no matter how realistic it looks, there's like this weird sense that we know what we're looking at is not real. And I don't think you can ever get away from that.
I think what popped in my head, because all I kept thinking about was the moments in the train crash where it just starts piling up, and you're like, you want like model cars, you don't want CGI, and I'm like, Blues Brothers,
which is a great
with the police cars just piling on top of one another, and that's cool because again, you can use cars, you can't use a train, so I get the idea of a train being it, but still at the same time it's cool, but it's a little campy and goofy, and it's like, okay, it's fun, yeah. But also okay, I've seen better.
It's goofy because we know like they cut to the characters that are inside, and we kind of see their point of view and like how they're taking this crash, and it's wild and insane. And the last reference to a random train sequence that I will reference just because I love this movie and it's an interesting little tidbit is Unbreakable, an M. Night Shyamalan movie where it opens up with our lead character riding in a train, right? And it's supposed to be this epic, crazy train crash. And originally in this film, he was going to show off this train crash. It was going to be insane. It was going to be all CGI. It was going to be this huge, wild, expensive, extravagant scene that I think they worked on and almost finished. And then he realized that it didn't work for the film, and he just did a quick fade to white right as the train sequence is about to happen, right as the crash is about to happen. So just a fun little random tidbit. But anyway, Ben, is there anything else that you want to hit on The Greatest Showman? I mean, we talked about the ending after the train sequence. Brad is pinned down. He gets blood from Sebastian, and it's goofy and dumb, and Button's a clown. Doesn't really get that satisfying of an ending. Is there anything else you want to hit on of the ending or anything else with The Greatest Showman?
I just started looking
Greatest show on earth. I just said The Greatest Showman.
I just started looking up like train sequences and movies, and I came up with an IMDb article. So Greatest Show on Earth is number 7, but it's ranked below Back to the Future Part 3, a movie called Silver Streak, Speed, Source Code, Super 8, and number 1 is The Fugitive. Which it's interesting that The Fugitive is...
It's a good train crash.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. So, I don't know. That just made me go pop my head. But in terms of other things I want to talk about, there's not too much more. There's some off-color jokes that they make in this movie. And there's a line where Brad's like, okay, we have to operate to not be in the black. And then someone says, you mean we all have to play in blackface? That's oof. That's pretty...
That's like the first 5 minutes of the movie, too.
Yeah, I know. It's really bad. I love this line from Sebastian to Buttons. Why are you in makeup? Why are you the great Sebastian?
Oh my God. I love that line.
That was a good quippy line.
I also loved his line where he says clowns are funny people. They only love once. And it also tells you about his character. Yeah. He did only love once. He had to kill his fucking wife.
Let's just end and talk about Buttons again. Okay. Because that part, like that part was so fucking cool. And like if you edited the movie and you included like the be a jumping jack scene, like that was like really fun. It's Holly and Buttons jumping on a trampoline. They're singing like "Be a Jumping Jack" to be loose and to have fun in life. Like that's really cool. The scene where again, like he meets up again with his mother, like so beautiful and sentimental. When he saves, Brad at the end, like it just feels like that there's this whole other movie in there, like just Buttons a clown, and even if that was included, even if the train sequence is included in that movie, like damn, that would have been a great movie. But shit, I get fucking inundated with this dumb love triangle. That's just like, Charlton Heston, just go to Gloria Graham. She's the more beautiful woman. She has way more care than fucking Betty Hutton, who I wrote down. I'm just going through my notes. She sounded like a fucking Sesame Street character to me. Like I couldn't pick that out. I think she sounds most like Ernie is the one that comes to mind. And just that acting is like one of the worst I think we will see in the Best Picture journey that we're on. That really frustrated me. Charlton Heston, you really bring it back up in Ben-Hur, but goddamn, are you bad in this movie? So Buttons the Clown, A+. Everything else, fucking F.
Well, how do you feel about? I mean, I like his conclusion of him using his skills as a doctor to save Brad, and it's so ridiculous that this is rare blood type that he has that the great Sebastian has in, and like
I don't even know my blood type.
And that's like them coming together, and that's like them having their arc is like solving their beef, even though like their beef was so artificial and just like not there to begin with. I just like wish we had a little bit more from James Stewart before the movie ends with like celebrating the circus at the end, but I guess we at least complete his arc.
We didn't even get to that part with the song they sing at the end, which one, Betty Hutton cannot sing, and two, the audio is just blown out. It is the sound in this movie is so bad. It's so bad. It's like blown out. It sounds like that's just a broken microphone they just stuck in Betty Hutton's face as she's singing outside. There's just no control. It's just DeMille being like, just get her to sing. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. All the pretty colors will make it good.
It's a guerrilla filmmaking, boy.
Yeah, some guerrilla.
What you're talking about.
Yeah. So I think we squeezed enough juice, but I think now we should get into the 25th Academy Awards.
These 25 years have cast some long shadows. But shadows are never seen unless the sun is shining. Our film memories would mean far less were Hollywood not so brightly aglow tonight.
The 25th Academy Awards were held on March 19th, 1953 at the RKO Pantages Theaters in Hollywood, California, as well as NBC International Theater in New York City. This is the first year in which the Academy Awards ceremony was televised in black and white on NBC, with Bob Hope as our host and Conrad Nagel as our host in New York City.
It's good to know. I didn't know NBC was the first one to televise this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, for reference, this show had an estimated television audience of 40 million at the time. This is the first televised program of the Academy Awards. And for reference, last year for the 93rd Academy Awards, we had 10.4 million people watching, which was actually a 56% drop down from the previous year in 2020, where we had 23.6 million viewers. So this is also just crazy to see just how many people are watching this. Television is still very new. In our last episode, you can hear our Master of Ceremonies talk a little bit about television, and it's kind of creeping in on cinema and whether people are kind of afraid of that. So that's interesting. We're seeing them almost combine and showing this on TV. But 40 million people. Can you imagine? Oh my God, man.
I mean, 100 million people just watched the Super Bowl. And also,
but
those are just guesstimates of how many people actually watch, which is, peel the curtain a little bit. TV ratings are just all estimates and based off of some statistical data off of an average of people. So you see ratings, sometimes doesn't equate. It also doesn't factor in streaming. And when you, which is another thing that's frustrating. Like, I know Oscar viewership is down and people want to be down the Oscars. People are still interested in the Oscars. People are still watching the Oscars. It may be through an illegal stream. They may be watching it through another streaming service that doesn't count for like that viewing and how it's rated. So, but what I'm basically saying is watch the Oscars this year. It's important. Please watch.
To me, it's just sad because I'm like, do you imagine if like double, and that's coming from 2020, if double the people watched this show, meaning like double the amount of people actually cared about film and film in Hollywood or film as a medium, like, I don't know.
I think people care about it, but I think, and I saw someone, I forget where I saw this, but someone wrote it kind of well, that was, it used to be an event because we used to see these celebrities as people for the, like, that was the only time of the year you got to watch them.
Actually see them, yeah.
Yeah, but now we have Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. We have every possible way to see celebrities as quote people, even though they are entertaining us with everything they do, even if you know that or not. They, so it doesn't. So the Oscars seem so just like, oh, but I know who that person is. I know I just saw them with their dress on 20 minutes ago at their home because they posted on Instagram.
No, it's very true. I think that shows just the huge shift that we have. There's no like, and that's what they always try in these modern era of the Oscars. They're trying to like make it bigger or like do some big selfie to show that we're all just like you and make it larger than just the show awarding people for, being a good actor or actress. So I understand both sides of it. I understand that side and seeing that we don't really get that insider peek, but I think that's also why a lot of actors shouldn't be on social media and shouldn't be, risking their career, for a better word, to just like say stupid shit on social media just because they think they need to. I think you look at like Leonardo DiCaprio, who has like no social media presence, as a great example of why people go out to see his films, why they want to see it. I mean, he's a great actor too, but I think that's part of it, part of his process and part of him not really being very public otherwise. This year also marked the first time in Oscars history that all top 6 prizes, Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, Supporting Actor, and Supporting Actress, went to 6 different films. This would not occur again until 1956, and then 49 years later in 2005.
The Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award this year was given to Cecil B. DeMille. So certainly fascinating that DeMille is getting the Thalberg Award. Like we've talked about previously about how this could be a precursor to someone winning Best Picture. But also, to me, it can signify that we're not going to give you Best Director because we're giving you this other prestigious award.
Yeah, any sign, do you think that there's like some feeling that they think that there's no chance that, his film's going to win, The Greatest Show on Earth's going to win? They feel like maybe High Noon's going to take it, and that's why they're kind of giving him this award for what he built?
I actually think the opposite. I think it's like this is like, oh, we're going to give you Best Picture because we're trying to celebrate you, and we'll get there when we get to Best Picture, because there's definitely some interesting stuff to note about that. But I kind of think the opposite. I think High Noon was kind of set up for failure for that award, and we will get there. We'll talk about that when we get there.
Best Foreign Language Film goes to France for Forbidden Games.
Best Special Effects went to Plymouth Adventures, a Technicolor film about a fictionalized version of the Pilgrim's Voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to North America aboard the Mayflower. So your big old special effect train sequence was not good enough for the Academy, John.
That's ridiculous. What is up with the best special effects? Just the weirdest movies that get thrown in here. I love it. Like, who thought that would be a good idea? I don't know. Maybe we'll watch it sometime. The Academy Honorary Awards go to George Alfred Mitchell for the design and development of the camera which bears his name and for his continued and dominant presence in the field of cinematography. Joseph M. Schneck for long and distinguished service to the motion picture industry. Miriam C. Cooper for his many innovations and contributions to the art of motion pictures. Harold Lloyd for simply being a master comedian and a good citizen. And Bob Hope for his contribution to the laughter of the world, his service to the motion picture industry, and his devotion to the American premise.
Best film editing went to Elmo Williams and Harry W. Gerstad for High Noon. This is Williams' first and only career win and Gerstad's second win out of 2 career nominations. It's just to note, High Noon, it was listed as the 54th best edited film of all time in a 2012 survey of members of the Motion Picture Editors Guild.
Yeah, we'll talk more about High Noon, but man, what a snappy, quick hour and a half, just like fucking gut punch of a movie.
Oh,
I
yeah,
love that movie.
Keeps it tense.
Keeps it really tense. It's amazing editing, so well deserved and worthy. Best costume design color goes to Marcel Vertiz for Moulin Rouge. This is Vertiz's first of 2 Oscars of the evening.
Best costume design black and white went to Helen Rose for The Bad and the Beautiful. This is Rose's first of 2 career Oscars. She would go on to win in the same category for the 1955 film I'll Cry Tomorrow.
Best cinematography color goes to Wynton C. Hoke and Archie Stout for The Quiet Man. This is Hoke's 3rd and final career Oscar in this category, and he's one of 10 cinematographers to win 3 or more Academy Awards. Hoke accomplished this as well in only 3 nominations. Stout was a second unit cinematographer for the film and was only the second unit cinematographer to win an Oscar. I'm glad he got nominated. I wonder how that kind of finagling happened. That's great to see that the second unit got also carried over.
The second unit. That can definitely be a tongue twister. Say that 5 times fast. Best cinematography black and white went to Robert Surtees for The Bad and the Beautiful. This is Surtees' second of 3 Academy Awards, making him another one of the 10 cinematographers to win 3 or more Oscars. But he did this in 15 total nominations, and he won his final Academy Award for the 1959 Best Picture winner, Ben-Hur.
15 total nominations. Wow. Best art direction color goes to art direction by Paul Sheriff, set direction by Marcel Vertiz for Moulin Rouge. This is Sheriff's first and only Oscar win, and Vertiz's second Academy Award of the evening after previously have just winning Best Costume Design.
Best art direction black and white went to The Bad and the Beautiful. Art direction by Cedric Gibbons and Edward Carfano. Set direction by Edwin B. Willis and F. Gleason. This is Gibbons' 9th of 11 career Oscars. He won in the previous year for An American in Paris. Willis' 6th of 8 career Oscars. Carfano's first of 3 Oscars. And Gleason's 2nd of 4 career Oscars. So total, these 4 would win 26 Academy Awards between them.
Best sound recording goes to London Film Sound Department for Breaking the Sound Barrier.
Best song goes to The Ballad of High Noon, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, from High Noon. Music by Dmitri Tiomkin and lyrics by Ned Washington.
Do not forsake me, oh my darling, on this our wedding day. Do not forsake me, oh my darling, wait long.
This is Tiomkin's first of 4 career Oscars and first of this ceremony, as Washington's second Oscar after previously winning for When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio, and this can also be heard in a potential Best Picture winner, Belfast. This is one of my favorite movie songs, one of, I think, the most appropriately used songs in a movie. It's pretty great. So I love that this is a Best Song winner.
Yeah, I love it. It perfectly kind of summarizes the film and our beginning of the marriage and then ending to their honeymoon. What a great song to kind of tie the film in a bow. Best scoring of a musical picture goes to Alfred Newman for With a Song in My Heart. This is Newman's 6th of 9 career Oscar wins.
Best scoring of a dramatic or comedy picture goes to Dmitri Tiomkin for High Noon. Tiomkin was the second composer to receive 2 Oscars, score and song, for the same dramatic film. The first was Lee Harline, who won Best Original Score for Disney's Pinocchio and Best Song for When You Wish Upon a Star. Ned Washington wrote its lyrics as he did for Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling from High Noon. So again, like another great win for High Noon. Really fits into, I think, the tone of the movie. So I think it's actually kind of surprising that 2 of the technical awards that it did win, besides editing, was song and score.
Best live action short subject 2 reel goes to Waterbirds.
Best live action short subject 1 reel goes to Light in the Window.
Best documentary short subject goes to Neighbors.
Best documentary feature goes to The Sea Around Us.
Best short subject cartoon goes to Johann Mouse.
Best story goes to The Greatest Show on Earth. Frederick M. Frank, Theodore St. John, and Frank Cavett. This is the second Best Picture winner to win the award following Going My Way in 1944. This is the only career wins for Frank, St. John, and Cavett. So you know what? I got to give it credit. I got to give Best Story credit for the only time, because I think it gets it right. This movie, great. Brilliant idea. We're going to talk about the circus. It's a shitty script and shitty end result. So you know what? Take it, Best Story. You get this one for the Greatest Show on Earth.
It's so funny because I find that this is only the second Best Picture winner to have this happen, and it was previously Going My Way, which, we enjoyed as a film, as a vehicle for Bing Crosby, but it is...
Well, that's the idea, is, hey, vehicle for Bing Crosby.
Exactly, but it's also like a story that we were like, this is barely a movie. Like, this is barely has a story. Like, it is so thin and loose, and a weird connection between the two. It's one of, like, only a handful that we felt was barely even a film in general.
And Bing Crosby was in both.
That's so true. We didn't talk about him being in the crowd. Yeah. Just cheese and eating popcorn.
Just a random cameo.
Yeah, there's a lot of cameos in this film. Best screenplay goes to T.E.B. Clark for The Lavender Hill Mob. Clark's only career win for Best Screenplay. And it is one of 15 films listed in the category Art on the Vatican Film List.
That list, I kind of just wanted to take a second because it's really fascinating what films are considered art. It's split up. It's split into religion, values, and art. So in art, you have Citizen Kane, 8.5, Fantasia, Grand Illusion, La Strada, The Lavender Hill Mob, The Leopard, Little Women from 1933, Metropolis, Modern Times, Napoleon, Nosferatu, Stagecoach, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and The Wizard of Oz. So to include 2001: A Space Odyssey on the Vatican's list of films is fascinating.
I just love that, like, after 1963, that's our latest film here, or 1968, A Space Odyssey.
Well, that's for art.
Yeah, just for art.
Just for the art, yeah.
They're like, that's the last film that was made.
Yeah,
to fit under our art category.
Best story and screenplay goes to Charles Schnee from Tribute to a Bad Man by George Bradshaw for the film The Bad and the Beautiful. This is Schnee's first and only career win. The Bad and Beautiful won 5 Academy Awards this evening out of 6 nominations, which is a record for the most awards for a movie that was not nominated for Best Picture or for Best Director.
Best Supporting Actress goes to Gloria Graham for The Bad and the Beautiful as Rosemary Bartlow. This is Graham's first and only career win, and she was previously nominated in this category for Crossfire in 1947. While Graham had a supporting role in The Greatest Show on Earth as Angel, she is probably best remembered for her role as Violet Bick in It's a Wonderful Life. Graham, only appearing for a little over 9 minutes on screen for The Bad and the Beautiful, long held the record for the shortest performance on screen to win an acting Oscar until Patrice Strait won for Network in 1976 with a 5-minute performance. So we talked a little bit about her performance. You kind of praised her a little bit. Is there anything you want to add to Graham's performance as Angel here? I just feel like she doesn't get enough to kind of be pulled into the story for me.
No, she definitely doesn't get enough. It seems upon looking up from this year that her dual performance from The Greatest Show on Earth and The Bad and the Beautiful was kind of like, I'm not equating it to the reconnaissance, but kind of this whole idea like, hey, here are 2 productions that you're a part of, and this is what's going to prop me up. And so that's definitely seems to have been a factor for why she won, but she won specifically for The Bad and the Beautiful and not for The Greatest Show on Earth.
And we also have Gene Hagen from Singing in the Rain, which is a huge film nominated this year, and it's so bizarre that we have last year winner being An American in Paris, this big MGM picture, And then the following year, we have what is known to be one of the most, if not the most iconic MGM musical, which is Singing in the Rain. So.
And surprisingly snubbed for the most part.
Yep, all across the board. Yeah, I think people would say this and High Noon are kind of the back and forth biggest snubs of the night.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to Best Picture. Best Supporting Actor went to Anthony Quinn for Viva Zapata as Eufemio Zapata. This is Quinn's first of 2 career Oscars. He would go on to win for Best Supporting Actor in Lust for Life from 1956. He's the first Mexican-American to win an Academy Award.
Best Actress goes to Shirley Booth for Comeback, Little Sheba as Lola Delaney. This is Booth's first win and only career nomination. Comeback, Little Sheba was her film debut role after previously being in the role on Broadway. In 1962, Booth became the 4th actor to accomplish the Triple Crown of acting, an Oscar, Tony, and Emmy. While she found stardom easily on film, she would only go on to make 4 more films.
Best Actor goes to Gary Cooper for High Noon as Marshall Will Kane. This is Cooper's second win out of 5 total nominations. He received 5 nominations for Best Actor and an honorary Oscar in 1961 for his many memorable screen performances and the international recognition he, as an individual, has gained for the motion picture industry. Gary Cooper, it goes beyond words what we can really say about him. He is phenomenal. As one of my favorite characters, Tony Soprano, say, the strong, silent type.
The strong, silent type is right.
Why can't anyone be like Gary Cooper?
As Marshall Will Kane. I mean, what an interesting performance. Like, we get this really tough, stern character who's, like, soft. Like, he has a soft core that he kind of refused to show anyone other than his wife and his recent wife. And, it's such a compelling character as well, and I think Cooper handles this with so much grace where you can see the pain, and it's a man going through his day basically knowing that he's going to die, and it's just such a fascinating tale. And then to have someone who's as confident and has as much swagger as Gary Cooper, like, come on, amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those classic great performances, and feels very right that it does win Best Actor. So
I mean, look at the stacked nominations he's with too, with Marlon Brando, Kirk Douglas, Jose Ferrer, and Alex Guinness. Like, come on, unreal. Like, that may be the biggest, best lineup that we've seen.
Yeah, I think Kirk Douglas is the only one who doesn't win an Oscar. Did Kirk Douglas win an Oscar? I don't think he won an Oscar.
You would know, boy.
I wouldn't know. So I'm gonna feel like an idiot if I just don't look this up quickly, because I'm pretty sure. But yeah, it's a pretty stacked lineup for actors. We rarely get to see that. It's enjoyable, I think, for a lot of us when we do get to see that. So there's no Oscar win for Kirk Douglas, so I feel good that I said it off the top of my head, and I was right about that.
Best Director goes to John Ford for The Quiet Man. This is Ford's 4th Academy Award for Best Director out of 6 nominations. It was a record for the director and for the Academy, but it would be Ford's last nomination and Oscar win. Ben, have you seen The Quiet Man?
No, I have not, unfortunately, at this moment, but who knows, maybe by tomorrow I will have watched The Quiet Man. But what a stacked year. So you have Ford winning. You have Joseph L. Mankiewicz, you have Cecil B. DeMille, you have Fred Zinnemann, and you have John Huston, all nominated. Like, that's a stacked line, a very straight white male stacked lineup, but still a stacked lineup for directors.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely recommend A Quiet Man. I mean, it's a beautiful movie. I think it's one of John Wayne's best performances. I think it's a kind of turn on his character, trying to reveal, much like Gary Cooper, a softer side to this stern, stubborn man. And it is a beautiful, beautiful film when it comes to the color, talking about the beautiful green hills and valleys. And what a great performance by our boy John Wayne.
5 outstanding motion pictures have been nominated as the best films of 1952. Here to make the presentation is a lady so well known as a founder of the Academy, so well beloved as America's sweetheart, Academy Award winner, Miss Mary Pickford.
Mary, how do you like our birthday cake? How does it look?
Wonderful, Bob. Simply wonderful.
Well, it should. You poured the batter for that cake. You put the first icing on it. And now it's up to you to light up this year's candle, the 25th, by announcing the best picture of the year.
Those nominated for the Best Motion Picture are The Greatest Show on Earth, DeMille, Paramount, Cecil B. DeMille, High Noon, Kramer, United Artists, Stanley Kramer, Ivanhoe, MGM, Pandra, S. Berman, Moulin Rouge, Romulus, United Artists, The Quiet Man, Argosy, Republic, John Ford, and Marion C. Cooper. The winner is Cecil B. DeMille.
When the Best Picture award was presented this year, it was presented by Mary Pickford, one of the founders and originators of the Academy Motion Pictures of Arts and Sciences. So this is not only the first time the Academy Awards was televised, it was also Pickford's first television appearance. So starting out as the big Hollywood star, finally being seen on TV. This is, we're 25 years into the Oscars. It feels very celebratory for Pickford to give it to DeMille as like the originators of this motion picture Academy. It has also been suggested that the film won Best Picture by default because many members of the Academy were reluctant to vote for the anti-Joseph McCarthy Western High Noon, whose screenwriter Carl Foreman had just been blacklisted. However, those who decry the film's Best Picture win have failed to notice that it also won 3 of its Golden Globe Award nominations: Best Picture for Drama, Best Director, and Best Cinematography Color. So Golden Globe Awards was a precursor to this, so maybe some could feel that Greatest Show on Earth was that momentum bringing it forward, that the box office glamour of it was a reason for it winning Best Picture. And also some people think it's just because that DeMille, just after a very successful career, just had to get an Oscar at some point. So here you go, DeMille, here's your Lifetime Achievement Award, which the Oscars love to do instead of awarding it to, which is now very controversial. And for many people today, for The Greatest Show on Earth, because they feel like a film like High Noon should have won, and they feel like a movie that isn't nominated there for Singing in the Rain, which no nomination for picture, no nomination for director, no nomination for actor, no music, nothing like to celebrate Singing in the Rain, which is unfathomable, is not there for who knows what reason.
Yeah, it really doesn't make much sense at all. It's really interesting that you kind of summarized it with Mary Pickford, and it's really fascinating. And after 25 years now, it feels like we're finally getting this like new class in Hollywood, this new transition with our most recent Best Director. I mean, Ford, this being his last win, his last nomination as well. We're kind of seeing this transition into a new form of Hollywood with new stars and this kind of progress where we're getting to really cement ourselves in color. And when it comes to High Noon versus The Greatest Show on Earth, it's such a hard comparison because of how different these movies are. I talked about how much I would love to edit down The Greatest Show on Earth, and maybe that would be an interesting editing experiment that I could do, is edit it down to 2 hours. But High Noon is an hour and 30 minutes. You open up the film, there's not even like credits. You're immediately, boom, placed into this world with our cowboy sheriff, anti-hero. Hero. He's not an anti-hero.
No, he is the hero.
He is definitely the hero, like, as much as you could be a hero. And we're just introduced to him and his wedding, and we're immediately brought into this story. And it's such an engaging story with a lot of interesting, complex characters in this small little town. And it takes place in a small town, and it's all focused and really precise. And every single shot is so choreographed and perfect and framed, and the editing is impeccable, continuing this pace, rapiding forward and forward, and the music that kind of keeps our rhythm in this film, and how it kind of builds up suspense as these villains, the real villains, are coming into town, and they're waiting for that train to finally bring them there to have their final standoff in battle. So it is such a streamlined, straight gut punch of a story that couldn't be any different. It's also in black and white. It's mainly this kind of trimmed down cast. It's not going for something that's kind of showy or extravagant. It's just pure and simple, incredible filmmaking. While The Greatest Show on Earth is just all over the place with goofy, weird performances, just CGI that just, not CGI, but compositing that is just so distracting, and green screening that you can't like look away from because of how goofy it looks, and a story that is just so thrown in there haphazardly, and just all over the place, where characters, we don't care about them. Another boring love triangle, maybe the worst we've seen yet. But at the same time, I found it very entertaining and a fun watch, and I would totally recommend people to go see this just because of how weird and goofy and odd it is. But is it time to kind of debate whether you think it's one or the other?
Yeah, so the debate is there. The debate is certainly fair for High Noon versus Greatest Show on Earth. Obviously, I think you can kind of tell which way I would lean, especially because I would want to include a movie that's not included on this year's list, which is Singing in the Rain. It's one of those just really disappointing moments where, and I think it's fairly, I think it's fair to criticize this win, that this is really just, hey, Cecil B. DeMille, we got to give you one. You're nearing the end of your life. It's been long overdue. We haven't done it for any of your other movies, whether that's right or not right. So here you go. And honestly, what's frustrating is because only 4 years later, the 10 Commandments come out, and that one should have won. Like, that was actually a really good movie compared to what did win, which we will get there in 4 episodes. So we got some time to get there, but give you a little sneak preview that, like, DeMille had one more in him, and that one more I think was still much better than what this one was. So it seems very premature, and that maybe they just did this because they probably felt maybe he was nearing the end of his life, which he was, but it still like had at least 5 more years down the road until then. So yeah, so I think High Noon should have won over this, but let's get some stats and figures for The Greatest Show on Earth. Currently, it holds a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. The average Rotten Tomatoes rating is a 5.49. The top critics percentage gave it a 60%. And interestingly, Rotten Tomatoes says their top critic rating average is a 10 out of 10. But it's only out of 9 people that are top critics have reviewed this movie. So that there's some differing numbers in there, and maybe not totally factual. So I would need to go to each individual review to understand, because sometimes they include reviews from the time the movie came out, and that may have been glowing, whereas you look at a modern review and it critiques it more. But anyways, an audience score percentage on Rotten Tomatoes is a 54, of an average Rotten Tomatoes rating of 3.37. IMDb gives it a 6.6. Metacritic does not rate this movie. It won 2 Academy Awards out of 5 nominations. This is the last Best Picture winner until Spotlight in 2016 to win less than 3 Academy Awards. So John, let's give our personal ratings for The Greatest Show on Earth.
I gave The Greatest Show on Earth a 65 out of 100. Now, for me, I don't have as much criticism as you may have with some of the cinematography, some of the technical elements I kind of overlook and kind of let go by. For me, the real big issues are the story and the kind of lack of concrete whether this is a film or not. And that's kind of the biggest issues for me, is that this is so interweaved with documentary footage. They don't really like focus on enough of it being a story. And then the other parts of it are just showing a circus, which is interesting, but I don't really consider that to be a cinematic film or a film. What about you, Ben?
So I gave The Greatest Show on Earth a 45, which right now that's tied for my third lowest with Cimarron. The Life of Emile Zola follows that, and then The Broadway Melody is my worst rated. So a 45 is not great. The technical, as I said, the technical aspects of this movie are just flat out bad. It tries too much, and it just is not successful at all. It tries to be innovative, but falls flat on its face. The cinematography is what it is at times. It's documentary at times. It tries to be extravagant, but also it fails because of the green screen, the lack of green screen being successful. The sound of this movie is very off. It sounds like it's blown out. It sounds distorted at times. The singing is not great. The acting is like James Stewart barely saved this movie, and even so, like, there's still not enough of his character that is the best part of the movie from it, because again, it's like 3 distinct different movies. So for me, this one just falls flat. The merits, I guess I would give it 4, is that yeah, it's cool to see the circus. That's fun. It tries to be something, but everything else it really falls flat for me. So it is a 45. So our average ratings for right now, out of 25 movies, John, you are at a 70.92, and I am at a 75.76. So, is The Greatest Show on Earth worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1952?
I'm going to have to say no. But I think my no is going to be a little bit different because I know you're going to say, and spoiler, I know you're going to say no. But for me, it really just comes down to, like, I don't think I can call this a full film. I think there's just so much of it trying to be just documentary or just kind of archive footage of the circus that it takes away so much from the actual film that I can't really say in full that, yes, this should be worthy. Plus, we also have, as you mentioned, High Noon, The Quiet Man, Singing in the Rain, Moulin Rouge. There's some really big heavy hitters here that would probably kind of go beyond, and especially I would consider those to be full-fledged films. But tell me, Ben, is this worthy?
So I might surprise you, John, but no, I'm kidding. No, this is a absolute not worthy for me. I want to kick this away and say, shoot to it, get out of here. You do not belong on this list. It is a black spot, a black mark on the Academy's resume, among a lot of many. But in terms of their Best Picture winners, this is one of the lower points for me. It just makes no sense why this movie really won, besides the fact, hey, DeMille hasn't won one yet, let's throw him a bone. It just isn't there. And for me, it goes back to this argument that's happening today, which is like, hey, movies that are popular and at the top of the box office, those need to be the Oscar contenders, not, independent movies or movies that are what you would call Oscar baity, dramas, some epic. Like some people really feel so up in arms because Marvel movies aren't nominated for Best Picture. Spider-Man this year wasn't nominated for Best Picture. But then to me, I look at this argument and it's like, it's not like the Academy has forgot about them. They've been doing big grand movies for years. And honestly, if I go through it, I think they kind of stopped this in the late 70s, early 80s, where they start to go a little bit more independent, where they start to go to the smaller films, the more Oscar baity ones, because honestly, it's grand big box office for most, for the next 15 years, in the Academy. And even before that, Gone with the Wind, that was a huge movie. How Green Was My Valley, that was a big one. Mrs. Miniver was big. Casablanca was a huge movie. So to bring up this argument that the Oscars never brings the popular ones, no, that's just not wrong. It's an ebb and flow of it. Maybe eventually it will correct itself and it will include the Spider-Man, the Batman movies, any of the superhero movies that you want to see there. But it's not like it's ignored it entirely in its past. Black Panther was nominated. Lord of the Rings, one of the biggest successful movies of all time. People think that's just an Academy Award winning movie and one of the best box office movies. So I don't know. That's going on a whole other tangent. But this is the big box office movie of 1952. Maybe that's why they wanted to give it Best Picture. But when I hear people trying to argue and be like, but I want Spider-Man there, it's okay, they just didn't want Spider-Man there this year, but they put John's favorite Nightmare Alley, so kudos to them for that.
All else I gotta say is just be kind to animals and give all your fur babies a little pat and kiss on their head.
I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And this is Worthy.
Come again to the greatest show on earth. Bring the children. Bring the old folks. You can shake the sawdust off your feet, but you can't shake it out of your heart. Come again, folks. The greatest show on earth. Come again.
Thanks for listening to Worthy, the breakdown of every Best Picture winner from past to present. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram at Worthy Podcast, on Twitter at Worthy Pod, and on Facebook at Worthy Podcast. Any inquiries can be submitted to worthysubmissions@gmail.com. Again, that's worthysubmissions@gmail.com.